Well, good morning, everyone. Appreciate House Ag Committee being here on this cold, early Tuesday morning. So I'm going to ask our Vice Chairman, Joe Camel, to lead us off with a word of prayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Father, we just thank you for this opportunity we have been given to come do your work, and we pray for your guidance in all that we do. We pray we honor you in our decisions, and just pray, thank you for the many blessings you've given us. And pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Joe. We got several things we're going to do this morning. First, I want to thank our staff here, Courtney George right next to me here, and Paul Higbee. Thank you for being here this morning, and my office staff, Nicole and Elise, and everyone over there. So a lot of help from me. You might notice something sitting on that table. And I know a lot of my committee is not here. We got a lot of conflicts this morning with other committees. But I've been waiting on some Senate bills to come over so I could show off this trophy. And Chairman Goodman just has not sent over any ag bills over here. And we've got a couple of other consumer bills this morning that I've got some senators here, so I just want to make sure we showed this trophy off. We're going to take it to the House floor here hopefully this week and let the whole House know about our win down at Perry with our House and Senate livestock showmanship. And I had a great team this year, Senators, and you can go back and tell your House Ag Chairman that we're going to keep this trophy. It looks really good in my office. And but I had some great team members, several of them on this committee. Chairman England, who is not serving right now, was on our team. Chairman Beth Camp was on our team. Chairman LaHood, Marvin Lim, who's on this committee, and Tom Kirby. So we had a great team, and we smoked them down there. Really did. So just that trophy looks really good on that table. Maybe they'll have to work hard next year and come. So we're going to change the agenda just a little bit here. Senator Albers is here, and we're going to hear SB 149 first. And if you could give us a LC number.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Thank you, and I actually grew up showing cows from a very young age, and competed twice, and you smoked us both times, so I may have been part of the reason why you guys are always so victorious. So we have a substitute LC 550055S. And this is making the change that we had discussed when I presented this to your committee the last time, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for hearing this again. All it really did in substance was to make sure, beginning on line 24, that it included all three components of payments of $10,000 or more, a lease or financing arrangement, or the terms of 120 months or 10 years or more, and is eligible for a seller or seller's representative's federal tax credits. And then, in general, as Legislative Council was looking at this, they actually decided that Title X was an appropriate place to put this, so they did move that, but everything else in the bill is identical. And I'm happy to do a quick review of the whole bill if you'd like, Mr. Chairman.
I don't think so. I just you explained to the committee the main thing that the sub did was instead of two of the three components, starting on line 25, it went all three just to make sure we did not inadvertently include some other type of businesses and industries there. So I think a lot of people have looked at this bill. We looked at this bill last week. Are there any questions from the committee? I see none. I would entertain a motion at this time, I think. would do pass if I have a motion. Do I have a second? Got a second. Any other discussion or questions on SB 149? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Hearing none, SB 149 passes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Would you mind if I came around the back to get a signature for your rules committee?
Absolutely.
Thank
Be
you so
glad
much.
to do that. Do you have a house sponsor in mind?
I think that was going to be you.
Okay, we can handle that. Thank you. Moving on, let me sign this. Okay, I see Senator Beach sitting in the audience. If we could, SB 132. I think this bill is also somewhat familiar to our committee. And if you would, this first hearing on this bill.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In my 11 years down here, this is my first time in front of the Ag Committee, so I'm proud to be in front of you.
Well, I hope you noticed the trophy there as
Yeah,
well.
I see the
did you?
trophy, yeah.
Do. Well, maybe we'll have some more.
Congratulations.
It's not an ag bill you bring. Is it an ag bill you're bringing here?
Yeah.
Good. Oh, that's why I brought the trophy.
All right. Okay, it's Senate Bill 132. I just want to start out by saying I'm a property rights guy, and I think every Georgian should have the right to sell their property. But what this bill does, and it prohibits the Chinese Communist government from buying our Georgia farmland, our land within a 25-mile radius of our military bases. And as you know, agriculture is our #1 industry. And lines 12 through 15 describes what farmland is. And then lines 17 through 39 describes what a non-resident that is subject of a foreign government that is designated as a country of particular concern by the U.S. Secretary of State. Now, there are 5 countries on the U.S. Secretary of State's list of particular concern: Communist China, Russia, Iran, Cuba, and North Korea. The reason I bring this bill is I really believe this is a national security issue. And I want to just give you some figures that are from the Department of U.S. Agriculture. In 2010, the Chinese Communist government owned 12,000 acres of U.S. farmland. Today, that figure is 268,000, and there's another 2 million acres that we're really not sure who owns through shell corporations. These are figures, again, from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. In closing, I would tell you this: the Chinese government is playing a 30-year long-term plan. They want to control our debt, and they want to control our food supply. And this is a methodical, long-term plan that they've got and they're executing. They're playing chess, we're playing checkers. They're buying land in the Bahamas, they're buying land all over. But we better wake up and protect our farmland and our food supply. It's not going to affect me, but 30 years from now, it's going to affect my kids and my grandkids. So I would ask for your favorable consideration. And let me be very, very clear, because this was asked when I presented this in the Senate. This does not prohibit a Chinese American resident citizen from buying land. This focuses on the Chinese Communist government, who do not like us, from buying our farmland. It's an issue, and I don't know if you know this also. The reason I put the military bases in there, the Chinese government, Communist government, recently bought land right next to a military base in North Dakota, and it's really concerning that they're buying our land near some of our military bases. So with that, the bill's very simple. It sums it up. I want to protect our farmland, and I want to protect our food supply. And again, I think this is a national security issue. With that, I'll open it up for questions. But thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to come before your committee.
Thank you for being here. I think it's, I agree with you, a very important issue for our country and for agriculture. And I'm glad we're taking a look at this. You do have a question, Representative Carter.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Senator.
morning.
First, I do understand that we have to always protect our citizens. But my question, and I asked the question because we had a similar bill that came through the House, do we know currently who owns land? If there are other foreign entities that currently own land within that 25 radius that of the military bases that this bill is looking to protect? Do we currently know who owns the
No,
land?
I do not, but I do know that the Chinese Communist government did buy land right adjacent to a ballistic missile site in North Dakota. One of our, yeah, so I don't know about Georgia, but I want to protect Georgia. So that's, when I found out about what they bought in North Dakota, I included that in my bill because I do not want them near any of our military bases spying on us.
Chairman, may I? The other question, so, and I heard you say how you determine which countries that we want to deny buying land. How would that list be managed?
Well, that
Will
list
people
is
come
managed
up,
by the
add
U.S.
on?
Secretary of State. There's a list of 5 countries that are on that, they call it the list, they call it, let's see what's, country of a particular concern.
Yeah,
It's basically our enemies.
Yeah, I
And
believe-
North Korea, for example, is our enemy.
correct. So I believe that language it was in the other bill also, and we did try to find those countries. So thank you for sharing
Yeah.
exactly where you got these.
Thank you. And I might add, Mr. Chairman, U.S. Senator Tommy Tuberville is working on a bill very similar to this in the U.S. Senate.
Okay.
It's of grave concern to the federal government also.
Thank you. Is there any other questions of the committee? We've got some other people signed up. Just want to reiterate, hear you say that again. This is not about any American citizen from wherever they're, whatever country they're from. This is about non-resident alien
Alien that is
from these particular
governments.
5 countries,
from those governments.
from those governments.
Exactly.
That
We're
our,
not-
that our
and-
U.S. government identifies.
And I will tell you this, Mr. Chairman, the Chinese Americans that have come to our country and become citizens, they want this bill. They know what communist China's up to. They've contacted me and thanked me for carrying this because they've seen what's happened. They don't want this to happen in our country. So that's why I brought this bill. So, but I don't want, again, it's not against a Chinese American resident. If they want to buy land, that's fine. I do not want the communist Chinese government purchasing our farmland, period.
Thank you. Well, we've got several people signed up to speak
Okay.
on this bill.
Thank you.
You can, thank you. And I'm with the number, we're going to keep it very short. We've got several other bills I want to get to, and I didn't realize we had so many people to speak to this bill. But we got Meredith, if you could come to this, to the podium mic and speak. Identify who you are, please.
Good morning, Chairman Dickey and members of the committee. My name is Meredith Yoon, and I'm the Litigation Director for Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta. Advancing Justice Atlanta is a nonprofit legal advocacy organization dedicated to protecting the civil rights of Asian Americans in Georgia. We have serious concerns about this legislation and its impact on property rights. These types of bills that prevent immigrants from certain countries from owning agricultural land actually have a long history in the U.S. Most notably, the California alien land laws of the early 1900s prohibited aliens ineligible for citizenship from owning agricultural land, which affected Chinese, Indian, Japanese, and Korean farmers. Ultimately, courts ruled the law violated the 14th Amendment, which protects all persons from racial or national origin discrimination. At the time, these laws were motivated by prejudice and deepened discriminatory treatment of Asian communities throughout California and other parts of the country. This proposed bill has the same fundamental flaws. Referencing a changeable list of countries in federal code does not make this law any less discriminatory. Though it does not name specific countries of origin in the legislation, it still conflates individuals with governments in a way that is by definition discriminatory. Also, excluding U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents does not make this law less problematic. At the time that the court struck down California's alien land laws, the nation's laws prevented Asian residents from ever becoming U.S. citizens and therefore applied to persons who did not have rights associated with a particular immigration status. There are already mechanisms in place to review property transactions that implicate national security and that require foreign persons or entities to disclose their holdings and transactions. This legislation is overbroad and it raises thorny legal issues. We believe that the bill has serious flaws and we ask that you do not move this legislation forward. Thank you.
Could you repeat again exactly who you represent? You don't represent foreign individuals, do you? It's American citizens that you represent?
Chairman Dickey, I'm with Asian Americans Advancing
Americans,
Justice.
okay.
Yes, and
Do you think this bill addresses those individuals? I mean, I think we just heard just the opposite from the senator, that it does not concern any American citizens, no matter what their foreign nationality might be.
Thank you, Chairman. I heard the senator's comments. Asian Americans Advancing Justice stands for the rights of Asian Americans and API communities regardless of their immigration status.
We've got one question. We're going to go ahead. We're going to save the questions till last. We won't get through all this, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Who is that? Priya? Yeah, can you come to and tell us who you are, who you represent?
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman and committee members. My name is Priyanka Bhatt, and I'm an attorney with a social justice organization called Project South. I am testifying in opposition of Senate Bill 132. I was shocked to hear proponents of the bill claim that the bill would only target corporations and government entities. Lines 33 through 35 clearly prohibit migrants from acquiring any agricultural land and all lands within a 25-mile radius from a military base, installation, or airport. That means migrants would not be able to buy a house, an apartment, a condo within a 25-mile radius from Savannah, Augusta, Columbus, Albany, and more where there are military bases. The question is, who does the bill actually impact? The terminology used is non-resident alien, who are from countries like Russia, China, Cuba, Pakistan, Nicaragua, and others on the countries of concern list designated by the Secretary of State. To break it down, non-resident alien means anyone who does not have a green card or is not a citizen. I talked to 3 different immigration lawyers who all had serious concerns about the bill and told me that it could apply to a wide variety of migrants, including international students, people on work visas, and people starting small businesses. Proponents of the bill have argued that the bill won't apply to them if they just don't leave Georgia for more than 2 months. Well, migrants on visas are human beings who are legally allowed to leave the state and country per their visa. My question would be, are you really going to ask an international student from Pakistan whose mother is dying to not go be with her family? Are you really going to ask the Georgia Tech professor from China to not visit her newborn nephew?
Okay, time's kind of running out. Thank you. We got a lot of people to get through. If you get
The one
to
thing I do want to add is that the bill is truly promoting anti-immigrant bias. It's discriminating against people because of their national origin, and we're not the only ones saying it. The Georgia Realtor Association testified against HB 452, a similar bill, because their lawyers told them that it would violate Fair Housing Act and create liability. Thank you.
Thank you. Annie Gattani. And if, okay, go ahead.
Chairman Dickey and members of the House Agriculture and Consumer Affairs Committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Annie Gilani, and I'm a political strategist at the Asian American Advocacy Fund, a grassroots organization with the mission to uplift the voices of Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, and Native Hawaiians in Georgia, regardless of their immigration status. I'm speaking to you today in opposition to SB 132 as passed the Senate. The language in this bill is vague and open to arbitrary interpretation, targets immigrant communities in Georgia, and impacts a larger number of groups in Georgia than its proponents admit. The vague language in this bill calls into question who is actually impacted by this bill. Lines 17 to 20 refer to individuals who are not a United States citizen or legal permanent resident and are a subject of a foreign government designated as the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 15, Subtitle 8, Part 7, Subpart A 7.4 by the United States Secretary of State. Lines 27 to 28, on the other hand, refer to corporations of countries designated as a country of particular concern by the United States Secretary of State. Proponents of this bill are suggesting that this bill only applies to governments. That is clearly not the case, as line 17 explicitly states, any natural person. Further, having two different definitions of which countries are impacted makes this bill confusing and open to misinterpretation. An additional concern is the broad impact of these restrictions and the large scope of potentially impacted individuals. It is our position that the language in this bill impacts more people than what the authors intended. Namely, this bill would also have unintended consequences for people on specialized business visas, H-1Bs, L-1s, and others, and people with refugee, asylum, and temporary protected status, TPS, or DACA, who are from countries listed on the federal regulations. This includes employees of large multinational corporations who are residing in Georgia during their employment. They would be barred from purchasing any agricultural land in Georgia or any land within 25 miles of a military base. This would also impact corporations, partnerships, or business entities owned by migrants from a number of countries, including Burma, People's Republic of China, Cuba, Eritrea, Iran, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Nicaragua, Pakistan, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. This also includes small business investments held by migrants who are seeking to develop long-term business relationships and establish residence within the state of Georgia. Further,
Okay.
this bill, I'll wrap up. Further, this bill discriminates against Georgia's immigrant and refugee communities and will impact their abilities to equitably own land in the state of Georgia. This bill will prevent immigrant communities from owning homes and businesses in Georgia with the intent of establishing lives here for their families, just as any other communities are allowed to do. With a large number of countries on both lists being Asian countries, and particularly given the recent increase of anti-Asian hostility in Georgia, we are deeply concerned about how this bill will impact our communities.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, appreciate it. Next on our list is Megan Gordon.
Good morning, y'all. I'm not a morning person, and I know y'all are in a hurry, so I will be quite brief. My name is Megan Gordon. I'm the policy manager with CARE Georgia. It's the Council on American Islamic Relations. I want to talk to y'all real quick about the constitutional right to travel, which is implicated in lines 21 through 24 of the bill, where we get into the requirements that the narrowing really that says this bill only applies to folks who have been physically absent from the U.S. for more than 6 months of the year, or physically absent from Georgia for more than 2 months of the year. I'm getting it in reverse because I'm underslept and undercaffeinated this morning, but y'all know what I'm talking about. It doesn't matter what kind of red flags those absences might raise for us. People have the constitutional right to be out of state and out of the country for that amount of time. The right to travel is based in both Article 4 and of the Constitution and in the 14th Amendment. The general...
I think that's referring to a non-U.S. citizen. If you
Yes, you're right. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you have more?
No. I was just trying to make sure you understand that
Yes, sir, I do.
that line was 21 was referring back up to a non-U.S. citizen.
Yes. Well, you see, the constitutional the Constitution and the 14th Amendment, it's a little particular because sometimes the word used is citizen and sometimes the word used is person, and it matters which is used. So we have to read the documents real carefully. So in the Constitution, when it used the word citizens' right to travel, so that would only apply to U.S. citizens, but in the 14th Amendment, it's right for persons to travel, and so that applies to immigrants as well. You with me?
I don't know. I'm not an attorney or judge, so
But I
go
still-
ahead. It's your,
Oh, you don't have
it's
to
your
be.
interpretation.
But you don't have to be to understand, and I hope y'all understand. No, with me.
Go ahead.
All right. See, the general policy of the 14th Amendment on these issues is that all immigrants with any kind of legal status in the country should be operating on the same legal level as U.S. citizens under non-discriminatory laws. So perhaps this clears it up for you, Chairman, is that the right to travel would still apply to legal immigrants in this country the same way it would apply to U.S. citizens. And there is an exception in the right to travel here for things called durational residency requirements. Sometimes, I do want to say sometimes without going down a huge wormhole, you can do something like say you must be in the country for 1 year before you can do X. There's a lot of case law on that. However, I want to pose the question here that we need to think about is what if this isn't about residency? Because this bill doesn't speak to whether they're domiciled in Georgia. And I know I'm using fancy lawyer speak. Domiciled is just a fancy lawyer term for like, where do you call your home, right? This just says they are absent from Georgia. I know. Bear with me. It's important, right? Because under this bill, it's entirely possible for someone to have lived in Georgia for years, but travel often enough to not meet the requirements for physical presence. For example, they might go home often to visit family, or they might have a job that has them travel a lot, or they might have an alien relevant relative in another state, or maybe they just really like to travel. Y'all, I dated a guy for a little bit who traveled so much that he was almost never like in his home. It sounds exhausting and crazy, but we don't have to understand why people travel or why they live their lives the way they do for them to be constitutionally protected or for them to not be straw purchasers for their governments. Because this is actually much broader language than I think y'all are actually trying to get at. I understand that y'all are trying to address a real concern here. I don't want hostile governments to be able to like sweep up all of the agricultural land in the state either. But
I think that's exactly what this bill is trying to address.
Yes.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, but
Thank you.
I will say I think you're taking this bill is taking the wrong approach here. It has a lot more constitutional problems than this right to travel issue, and so I hope y'all will pause and rethink your approach here.
Thank you for your comments today. I appreciate your time.
Appreciate y'all.
Okay. Next on our list, Giovanni Serrano. Thank
Good
you
morning.
for being here.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Giovanni Serrano. I am a community organizer with the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights, GLARD. And today, I just want to start. The SB2 reminds me of why it's so important to teach the real history of our nation, to prevent us from repeating the same atrocities and mistakes we committed in the past. In 1933, our community faced a housing shortage. The federal government began a program especially designed to increase and segregate American housing stock. Housing programs under the New Deal designed to provide housing to white, middle class, lower class families, left African Americans communities, and other people of color out of the new suburban communities and led them into projects. That's something I read from Royston, the Colorado Law. State legislatures enacted alien laws between 1880 and 1920 in response to a wave of anti-Asian sentiment. Alien laws barred Asian people from owning land. The California alien law was eventually overturned by the Supreme Court in 1952 for violating the 14th Amendment. The same return is taking place again in where fear of economic competition and the best solution is to rely on a wave of anti-Asian xenophobic laws that are being presented in various chambers across the nation. Targeting people by nationality is problematic. It's not a good way of identifying people who are national security risks, who are acting on behalf of a foreign government. The only thing it does is to express this kinds of gut suspicions and hostility to these countries. It creates an anti-Asian xenophobia and fear-mongering without any evidence. It is important to remember our history and recognize that alien laws serve as a stark reminder of the ways in which legislation can use subtle language to inflict massive damage on the opportunities provided to a particular racial, ethnic, or socioeconomic groups of people. That is why today we stand against SB 132 and ask that this bill does not move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving along, Alvin Kendall from the Kendall Law Firm.
That's for the burial purchaser.
Oh, that's, all right, those are your bill. Good. Got one other, Darlene Lynch, Coalition Refugee Services. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much. My name is Darlene Lynch. I'm from the Center for Victims of Torture, and we provide services to help refugees and other asylum seekers and others from countries of particular concern to heal from those wounds and to be productive citizens here in Georgia. I'm also here on behalf of the more than 36 organizations in the Coalition of Refugee Service Agencies and the Business and Immigration for Georgia Partnership. And I recognize and agree with the concerns that motivated this bill. I don't think any of us want hostile foreign nations buying up Georgia land, but I do disagree with the author's representation. The bill actually does not, it would hurt the refugees in this country, in this state that Georgia has welcomed here. When I say Georgia has welcomed here, for more than 4 decades, Georgia has had a state refugee program based in the Department of Human Services and the Department of Public Health, and has welcomed people in need of refuge from countries like Cuba and Eritrea and Burma. And Georgia's program has become a model for our nation. All the refugees in Georgia, about 90% of them are economically self-sufficient within 6 months. Okay, so these are hardworking and law-abiding new Americans, but they're not lawful permanent residents. Do you know how long it takes to become a lawful permanent resident? Right now, you have to wait 1 year before applying, and according to the U.S. government, the processing time is now 35.5 months. These are folks who were welcomed to Georgia, who have contributed to Georgia, who have paid taxes to Georgia, and who are trying to achieve the American dream. And to put this roadblock in front of them for no other reason that they were actually targeted and terrorized by these same countries doesn't make sense. So I would argue that this bill is overly broad, that it does in fact target hardworking Georgians, new Americans, and that I would ask you to reconsider whether this is fair to Georgia and whether it actually contravenes a 40-year history of welcome that our state has had. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it back over to the senator. If you could want any statements, I'll do that, and then maybe a couple of other questions from my committee maybe.
I respect everybody that spoke, but I want to be very clear, we are not targeting people. We're not discriminating against Americans or even folks that are here. But what we are doing, if you'll just go to line 17, this is the whole crux of the bill. Who is not a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident is a subject of a foreign government designated as the Code of Federal Regulations by the U.S. Secretary of State. And that's those 5 countries that I originally talked about. And I would tell you, those 5 countries, they don't like us. Let's just be honest. They do not like us. We couldn't go buy farmland in China. I can promise you that. None of us sitting up here could do that. And I will just tell you, to the one lady's comments about torture, if we don't control our food supply, we will be tortured. So just think about that in 30 years if we didn't control our farmland. I'm trying to address a situation that I think is critical and national security issue, and I'm not trying to discriminate against anybody. Any Chinese American citizen can buy land within 25 miles of a radius of a military base, they can buy a house there, they can buy farmland. The other thing is, we're only talking about land that is zoned agriculture. This is not any other land. This is agriculture land. We are losing our farmland anyway. When you talk to Senator Goodman, he'll tell you we've lost 20% of our farmland. And I think, Mr. Chairman, you're in the business, and we want to protect our local farmland and our food supply. It's our number one business in the state of Georgia. So I'll just end with that. I mean, we're not targeting or discriminating against anybody. We are just not allowing these 5 countries that are on the U.S. Secretary of State's list to buy our agriculture land, period. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Senator. I see no other questions. Thank you for presenting this, and we'll certainly consider this, and thank you for your time.
I'll be back in touch with you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. We're going to move on. Representative Becky Evans. I apologize for the wait, and you had to wait a week.
Yes.
So I'm glad you're here with HB 486. Members, it's in your packet, so you have the mic.
Thank you so much, Chairman. I appreciate this opportunity. I'm here to talk about Burial Purchaser Protection Act, HB 486, LC 365499. And first of all, I want to say that I'm very glad to have several people here today that represent the families of the situation that brought this case forward. And the attorney for the case is here and prepared to speak also. But basically, we have a problem here in Georgia. This is a simple consumer protection bill that funeral homes are allowed to sell contracts where they can prepay for a lot, so families can prepay for a burial purchaser. To bury their loved ones many years in advance, and know that that's taken care of. But the statute of limitations in Georgia only protects those consumers for 2 years after the deed has been paid for. So basically, if you there's a bill summary here that I hope you all have, but basically we had a situation, and this has happened other times, where a family bought a lot and prepaid it, and then when they went to go bury their mother, someone else was buried in their lot, and so initially the funeral home asked for someone else to they offered other land. The family said, no, we want our family member to be buried in this place, and then you can hear the more details, but basically the funeral home didn't want to disinter the other bodies, and so the family went to court, and then once they got to court, then the funeral home did disinter the other bodies, and it was just kind of a mess. So it's not fair to our consumers, to people who buy these lots, that they don't have the protection in the statute of limitations. And so so under the current law, the consumer's family has no recourse because the statute of limitations expired in this situation, 2007, for any claims against the cemetery, even though the breach of contract didn't occur later. So the solution in HB 486 is to simply provide for the start of the 2-year statute of limitation to commence at the time the consumer or the consumer's family requests the use of the pre-need plot or burial purchase. And so you see that on lines like 28 through 33. So the cause of action, 2 years from the date of the sale, whether or not pursuant to a written contract, provided, however, that as to the sale of the burial lot, burial right, burial merchandise, or burial services, a cause of action in this code section shall be brought within 2 years from the date of the completion of such sale, or within 2 years after the request for the use of such burial lot, whichever is later. So, yeah. Great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You do have several questions.
Okey-doke,
here.
yes.
Representative, is it Bennett or Carter?
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning,
Good morning.
Representative.
Thank you.
Thank you, because I just whispered I need to go check on our plots. I wanted to make sure that I was clear in your statement. You said that current law is that the purchaser only has a right 2 years after purchase.
After the deed is completed. So if you prepay it, like if you pay it every month for 5 years and then you fully paid it, then by the time then you have 2 years from after that time
To use it.
that your statute of limitations applies.
Current law.
That's
okay.
correct.
That's the piece that I was trying to be clear.
Thank you.
So if someone just paid for the plots outright, then they have 2 years basically to use it. But what this legislation, you're saying that they will have 2 years after notification, which means normally you don't use them until you need them.
Right.
We got funeral home caucus over here today. Okay. Yeah. I mean, so I'm in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I know my family bought some like 30, 40 years ago. So if you only have 2 years, you're right. You lose that right. So yeah. So thank you for this, but I just wanted that little piece of clarity. Thank you.
Thank you. Like you don't expect to have to go every 2 years to go check to make sure someone's not buried in your lot. Yeah, that's kind of unfair. So.
Representative Bentley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, committee members, and thank you for your work on this legislation.
And thank you for your support. It means a lot. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Question, this issue is only for funeral homes that own cemeteries, right?
This is
Because
my
I own a
understanding.
funeral home, but I don't own a cemetery, so
Right.
I don't sell
Yeah.
burial plots to families. If a family need a burial plot, I direct them to a cemetery. And in my area of the state, most family have plots already affiliated with a church or just a local cemetery. So I want to make sure we clear in the room
Well-
that this is really for those funeral homes that own cemeteries, right?
Yeah, this
Not
is-
every funeral home owns a cemetery. I just want to bring that part
Right.
out.
So it's in what the law covers is burial lot, burial right, burial merchandise, or burial services. Yeah. So I welcome if the attorney wants to speak, to that anymore. But that's my understanding is it's for whoever controls the burial of the body.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the point is not every funeral home own a cemetery.
Right.
Right.
Right. Okay.
So I just want to bring that point out.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we got lots of questions. Representative Willis.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, I come from a community that prepays for burial plots. My grandmother lived to be 102, and her plot was paid for decades before her expiration.
Yes.
And when we went to memorialize her, the ownership of the cemetery had changed twice. And the contract that she had, thankfully, we had the paperwork. The paperwork that she had, they no longer used anymore. So my question to you is, I'm seeing two issues here, but I just want to make sure that I'm viewing it properly. Is one of the issues here the shift in ownership of cemeteries and the lack of records that they possess?
I think that is my understanding, that has been a problem because that's happened in this industry that and so maybe the records haven't been kept as they've been bought by other companies.
Haven't been transferred over, therefore not honored.
Right, and
by
I'd be
new
happy to,
ownership.
at some point, Chairman, to bring up the attorney to sit with me to help answer questions. Would that be appropriate or?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
yeah. So, yeah.
Okay, and then my second question, and I'm not sure if you can answer it or not, I still need clarification around the statute of limitations. Are you saying that under current law, when you pre-purchase a burial plot and pay it off, and there's a deed involved, that you have 2 years to utilize the
That is all our current Georgia law protects you.
And therefore, if there's no expiration within 24 months of the payment of the plot,
Well, no, it has to be, the contract has to be completed.
the contract has to be completed.
So
and
that
paid in
means it has
full.
to be paid in full, but then you're only protected 2 years after that, under
Okay.
current statute of limitations.
Current
Yeah,
statute,
under
okay.
current Georgia law.
Thank you.
Yes, at this point, is it appropriate for me to bring up the attorney too, or do you
Yeah,
want?
well, we got some more questions.
Okay, all
But
right.
we can bring up some people to speak and
Well-
then maybe ask questions a little bit later. Does
Excuse me,
anybody
I
got
think,
a real pending-
would you be willing to come up, sir? And then if, this is the attorney that he's I'd let him introduce himself as attorney,
Okay.
Kendall Alvin.
Have a
We're very
seat.
glad to have him here. And he's represented both sides of this issue, so he's a really
Okay,
excellent witness for us.
absolutely.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. My name is Alvin Kendall. I'm a local attorney here in Atlanta. Ms. Willis is my representative. I sit on both sides of this because my wife's family owns a cemetery here in DeKalb County. So we've had the problem of burying somebody in the wrong grave, and I've been on that side. I represent the Jordans who are here, who've been on the other side, where their mother, Mr. Jordan and his wife, bought a plot back in 1986. She did not die until 2017. When they went to the cemetery, 2 people were already buried in Mr. Jordan's grave and in Miss Jordan's grave. And we had a problem with the cemetery wanting to do the right thing and disinter and let them use the graves. They had a problem with somebody else already being in their grave. So it was a big problem. It went to court. The jury found in favor of the Jordans. It went up to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals said no. Georgia law specifically says that when you buy a cemetery plot and 2 years from the date of completion of the sale, that is, if you finish paying on time, or if you finish paying in one lump sum payment, when 2 years from that date come, you cannot sue the cemetery if they go back and sell your plot. So the way it is in Georgia right now, a cemetery can sell everything. 2 years from that date, they can go and sell it again, and they can keep the money because you cannot sue them if they bury somebody in your grave. And I've been on both sides. My wife, we had this conversation this morning. She says not right. She doesn't mind me coming down here saying that we ought to change this law. I'm sure some other cemeteries may say different. To answer your question, though, this law, the Cemetery Act, applies to both cemeteries and funeral homes. There are a few, like my wife's family, they own both a funeral home and a cemetery. But you don't have to have a funeral home for this law to apply. The Cemetery Act applies to both funeral homes and cemeteries. So what Representative Evans is asking you all to do, and I think it's only the right thing for consumers in this state, is that you have 2 years from the date of the completion of the sale or the first time that you ask to use your plot to file suit if they have buried someone in your grave. I've had several of these cases come up. Some people say, I don't want my wife in a grave that's been occupied by some other man. It's just a preference that people have. And so, right or wrong, but we're asking that the law be changed to say that you have 2 years from the date that you asked to use it or 2 years from the date that you finish paying, whichever one comes later.
Okay. Very, very well summed up. Got a couple of additional questions. Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. I am sitting here in shock and awe. This is the first Consumer Affairs. Thank you. I learned a lot here 2 years, when I purchased my lot, along with my family's lot, I thought I was making a real estate purchase, just as if I were purchasing property. So what you're telling me now is that that is not so.
You get a deed,
I have a deed.
but if somebody gets in there and it's after 2 years, you have no rights to go against that cemetery to right that wrong. And if they decide not to do it,
So this law, this proposed bill, is to extend that time indefinitely?
No.
Or what is it doing differently than what currently exists?
it gives you 2 years from the date that you asked to use the plot to file suit,
Okay.
or 2 years from the date of purchase, whichever one is later.
Well, my lot has been purchased for
Chairman,
20 years.
Chairman
Thank you.
Perkle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got to tell you, this is a conversation that my wife and I did not have this morning on burial plots and death and such, and so and I didn't know we'd be talking about this today. So I understand where the law that we have right now is deficient. It is. I think it's unclear, and maybe we need to do something with that. But this is not just about burial plots. This is also about burial merchandise and burial services. So Granny, when she pays her funeral, so nobody's got to do anything when it comes up. They come to your place and they do the same thing. And they'll go to Danny's place and do the same thing. It's not just that plot. It's, all right, this is a casket we picked out. We want these flowers. Well, if it was in 1986, you might have paid $3,000 for a full meal deal. And Granny don't pass until 2023. That you got a really good deal when you paid for it back then, provided you could still get it. And then maybe they change up the casket, they change up the whatever, but we're not just talking about burial plots here. Anytime we look at calls of action in legislation, it causes me to have a pause, because no disrespect to my friend in front of me, some of our attorney friends have got a little froggy on making calls of actions and suits. Would it be possible to remedy this by just striking out those lines and not adding underline language here? And that way you do away with no person may bring action under this code section more than 2 years from the date of blah, blah, blah. Why do we have a 2-year deal anyway? I mean, what, are we stuck on 2 years? Is that some kind of lawyer statutory average or something?
Well, in most personal injury cases in Georgia, the statute of limitation is 2 years. And
Okay.
So I think that's where the state legislature has been stuck on 2 years, because 2 years applies to a whole lot of other causes of action in the state legislation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to address your question about the other aspects of caskets and all that, in the Cemetery Act, cemeteries and funeral homes in pre-need has to set up an account with a financial institution to keep that money. And so they keep able to keep the interest on it, and the whole theory behind it is that the interest probably has increased and the money has gone up as the cost of living or the cost of goods have gone up. We all know that that's not one and the same, but that's the idea behind it. And you'll see most cemeteries and most funeral homes, they're not gonna let you prepay for everything. They want you to prepay for just enough, so you have to come back to them, and then they're gonna add today's prices on those things that you did not prepay for. And so it's a sales tool in order to try to keep the family coming back to that particular establishment.
So the concern, is there a follow-up that I might have, or we need to roll on?
Well, let's move on.
All right.
We've got another Senate bill I really want to here, and I know folks got a lot of conflicts. Chairman Camp.
Good morning, and thank you both for bringing this bill. I was reading this, and it kind of struck me. I mean, this, of course, is a cause of action, which Chairman Perkle just brought up. And the funeral homes are required to make, or not funeral homes, excuse me, whoever owns the cemetery is required to, what's their requirement right now? If someone showed up with a deed and that, if someone had been buried, what's the funeral home's requirement right now?
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely
so the deed,
nothing.
So the deed they've received is worthless, basically.
It's worthless.
Okay. All right. So the cause of action, of course, is damages. It's not only making good and getting that person in the proper burial plot. It's also for damages, correct?
That's correct. If it's any, it's not always not. It's not always damages, but if there are any damages, there are.
Do we have any statistics on how often or how frequent this has happened?
I have tried. I've had 5 cases in my career where this has happened. 2 on the side of my family and 3 on the other side as plaintiffs.
Okay.
So it does happen. And one of the things that brought up, you have a lot of conglomerates that have gone in and bought cemeteries. Old records and the way cemeteries are supposed to be plotted out, a lot of the old records are gone. When they buy the cemeteries, they had paper records. Now everybody's gone to electronic records, so it's easy to keep the records. A lot of times the paper records don't get transferred over. When my father-in-law bought his cemetery, it was because 3 in-laws got in a fight, and 2 said, I'm going to sell my interest because I don't like the other one. And they just gave him the keys. And he gave him some money, and whatever records were there was there, but they were in a mess. And he's had to disinter people all over the place to try to get it correct because it didn't have good records when he bought it.
Okay,
thank you.
we've got we're gonna take a couple more questions, then we're gonna move on. And thank you, Representative Mathis.
Yeah, thank you for coming. I've been in the funeral business 50 years, and what Representative Bentley said, a lot of funeral homes do not own cemeteries. But I am perplexed by you saying the Court of Appeal said that this deed is no good, because I have a lot that I bought that was bought back in the 60s, 50s, and it's still a good deed. So what I'm saying to you is I wish we'd look into a little bit more. I was talking to Lady Chancellor here to make sure that that's interpreted correctly, because I thought once you paid for something, that'd be like buying a piece of land. I mean, you got a deed, you're entitled to that. Now, the thing that we've run into is that we've had these perpetual cares where they go out and do these memorial gardens, and they sell you these packages with a lot, a bronze memorial and the vault. Some of them even included the opening, closing of the grave, and they get sold. They take the money and they leave, and there's no annuities beside, and somebody takes it over. The state regulates this, but it's very hard to do, and I sympathize with the family because I've seen that. But I am concerned that if you pay in full and this deed's no good, that's very, very unusual to me, and I wish we could look into that a little more in depth. I'm not disputing you, but I'm just saying that needs to be looked at and changed on a lot of spectrums, not just the funeral. But this is mainly what we're talking about, cemetery. And I want to make one other point, and I'll hush, Chairman Dickey. If you come to Cochran and you buy a pre-need funeral, you're going to get what you paid for, whether it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And if you want your money back, we'll give you your money back. Now, they're bad players in everything, but that's not the case all over the state. So I just want us to find out that part about you saying after 2 years your deed's no good really concerns me greatly, because that is not the case I've seen in 50 years of doing this. So I don't agree with that, but I'd like to get proof of it.
Right.
Well, we have lead counsel here, Paul.
Yeah.
You got any comments off the cuff on this?
And excuse me, Mr. Chairman. I also want to just say, we do, that Court of Appeals case is, I
Yeah.
gave you several copies of that, and I hope Ledge Council has that too. Yeah, where it did say just that, but
Okay.
anyway.
Chairman, I have not seen that. I didn't draft this
Okay.
bill, but we can certainly find it.
Okay.
If it's out there, we can easily find it.
Okay. Okay, one more question. Representative Bentley, you got anything you just got to?
Just a comment, just to kind of add on to what Representative Chairman Mathis just stated. And we're certainly sympathize with the families, but you will not find that the case down in our part of the state. We honor what we do with these families, especially at our firms and at Bentley Mumford Mortuary. Yes.
Absolutely. Mr. Chairman, may I say a quick word, please?
Excuse me?
May I say
Yes.
quick word? Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge, I want to thank both Representative Bentley and Chairman Mathis for co-sponsoring this bill, and I absolutely agree that this, there are exceptions, there are outliers, and that most of our funeral home, and cemetery owners are on, do follow through, and so this is just to, catch the bad actors and to provide important consumer protections for Georgians. So, thank you.
Thank you. And I know there's a couple more questions, but we're gonna move on. We've got one more. So thank you.
Great.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I just did want to honor the family. Just really quickly, can I just honor the
and I
people who are here?
apologize.
Yeah.
I mean, the time is.
No, it's all right. It's all right.
And I appreciate
This
them
is
coming.
Mr. Jordan, the husband of the woman. Yeah, and this is Ms. Menifee, the daughter of the woman, and then all of the sons here and daughter-in-law, and the clinical social worker that advised the family during this really difficult time. So, thank you all so much.
Well, thank y'all for being here and supporting. I assume you're in support of this bill, and thank you for your time down here. I'm sorry this committee is short on time. A lot of bills are coming this time of year.
We hope we get a vote next year, sir. I'm glad. Thank you for the hearing today.
Well, thank you. I know it's an issue for people when it happens, especially during that time of bereavement. Senator Harold Jones, appreciate your patience. If you come to the table, thank you for Bill. Hope you noticed the trophy there as well too. Looks good.
I do notice it, Mr. Chairman.
Maybe Senator Goodman might put you on his team next year to see if he could win it back. I don't know.
He probably should do that because I see in
he
2015
didn't have a
I
very
was
good
on
team
there.
this past year, so hopefully you can try out.
Absolutely.
for it.
Hopefully we can get it back. No doubt.
Thank you for bringing this bill.
Thank you.
I think it's something we talked about last year, and I know. I want to frame something before you get started for our committee. I've been studying your bill, talked to Representative Bennett. Cameron's got a bill, and I've sort of come to the conclusion, I don't know where you or Representative Bennett agree with me, but it seems like we keep talking about two different issues, and I've sort of, prior to this week, kind of lumped them together, but I think we need to think about as a committee and maybe as some bills that we have a real problem with food access. Being that grocery stores and food stores are distance away from where we live to shop. It might be 10 miles, and for me, it's 15 miles. We got the greatest grocery stores in the world in areas around me, in Warner Robins and Macon and Barnesville and Forsyth, but they're all 15 to 20 miles away. So that's kind of an access. I've got a car and I travel a lot, so it's not a problem for me having access to those grocery stores. But some other people that don't have transportation and that sort of thing, the access is a problem. We also have a problem with food security, that people adjust. Our food banks are trying to get food to people who cannot afford it. They're just food insecurity, whether it's children, adults, elderly, or just not getting enough food, being able to afford enough food. So I want to see if we can speak to the two different issues with bills and approaches on how we tackle these two problems. I think when you lump them both together, we get a little off track. So if you're, I'd like the committee to keep that in mind as we look at some of these bills: insecurity and access. So those are just my comments, and I'm gonna said enough. And Senator Jones has been to study committees, read a lot about this, is really dived deep into this problem that his bill's trying to look at. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's SB 177, Georgia Food Insecurity Eradication Act, and that's one of the key things right there. We're talking about food insecurity. And I would kind of touch on what we were talking about also as far as bringing grocery stores in, which kind of deals with food deserts and things of that nature, and show that they are different. They intersect on some levels, but they also are very different, and they kind of have different prescriptions how to alleviate each. Way to kind of look at this is in a couple of levels. Number one is kind of set the stage of, let's say we have the grocery store here. So now we have the grocery store. We've done our incentives. I know that Representative Bennett has a bill to basically look at incentives for retailers. Let's say we have the grocery store. So that's one aspect of it. Now the question becomes insecurity, even though the food is now there. A couple of issues there. Number one, the grocery stores are facing, and this has been an ongoing problem in Georgia for years. This came out through our study committee. So if we're talking about incentivizing grocery stores, what we're talking about is going to a place that's probably going to be economically depressed. So those persons are going to need WIC benefits and SNAP benefits, both for federal and also state programs. One of the things that we've been finding is that because of regulation, and you'll see in my bill, SB 177, it talks about trying to ease regulations. We had persons who came in from the grocery store industry. We also had persons who came in from different agencies. Number one thing we found is that they really have never really spoken to each other. They really have not really talked and really tried to iron out what the differences are on any real level. Secondly, they still haven't. But so the differences are, for instance, you have persons who sell WIC. They have to wait a year. They can sell what we call SNAP benefits, but they have to wait a year before they can actually do the WIC benefits. Well, if you're trying to serve these kind of customers, that year in an industry where you only have 1% profit margin can be a difference of actually surviving, because that's the customer you're actually trying to serve, but your regulation is actually stopping you from being able to do it. Another aspect of that particular regulation or regulations is buy-sell dates, for instance. And buy-sell dates, grocery store owners are saying, those are not really dates. Your buy-sell dates are not dates where food actually has gone bad. But because of state regulation, which is very tough and very rigid on that, we're having to remove those items off of our shelves. But those food items are not bad, but we're actually having to remove them off, and that causes various issues too. And then, of course, you have the issues of transportation, general economic concerns that are going to exist, and then, of course, how to increase persons who can get access to WIC and SNAP benefits. So that's where our insecurity comes from. So in this particular example, we have the grocery store, but that doesn't solve the issue. Then, of course, we have the issue of actually how do we actually change eating habits? Because when we start talking about food insecurity, what we're also talking about is persons who are not eating healthy. How do we actually get to those eating habits and change those? That's one kind of example of a layered conversation. But let's look at another. With a 1% profit margin, even with if we have incentives, there may be areas that, quite frankly, are not going to get typical grocery stores. Those areas are going to be served, and they're currently being served now, what we consider to be like our Dollar Generals and Food Depots. That presents another issue, because Dollar Generals and Food Depots, just because of their size alone, although Dollar General is becoming more proactive in offering healthy foods, they believe in the next 10 years, 10,000 of their stores will be able to offer fresh fruits and vegetables. They're really concentrating I won't say concentrating, but they are actively in Georgia trying to change that. But their size is going to prevent them from really being able to produce with so much. They're small. Food depots are small. They're designed to be small. So what fits that gap? And that goes exactly to what the chairman was talking about, which is food banks. And that's why you see food banks on here. So food banks now are going to have to fill in those particular gaps. And many times those gaps are going to be in your rural areas. Because with a 1% profit margin, no matter how many incentives you give, you may not be able to attract the typical grocery store that we're thinking about. Can get the Dollar General, can get the Food Depot. They're filling a need. And one of the things we found out with our study committee was I actually came in with the preconception, get rid of the Dollar Generals and everything would be fine. Find out that's just not going to work. They are feeling the need in society. They're feeling the need there. Your Food Depots are feeling the need. So they're going to fill that need in a lot of rural areas, but it's not going to be enough. That's where our food banks come in. That's where our food pantries come in, and they play a large role in those rural areas. And that's why during our study committee, we had our food banks in rural areas come to testify, and they talked about some of the access issues or some of the problems that they have of expanding. Going once again back to state regulations. One food bank person talked about county regulations are being more difficult to navigate, and that prevents them from really being able to serve customers that have to be served, because they're going to have to fill that gap. They have to, because that gap is going to exist. And then as one food bank operative said, he said, because he was in a rural area, he said, only 6% of any kind of private donations usually actually trickle down to rural areas. So we have food banks that do these, and we get persons who are actually given to food banks, but we're not receiving that. We're not receiving that money. So they have that issue there. So as you see, you get multiple issues. So on one level, you have the grocery store is there, and you have issues there. On another level, you're not going to have a traditional grocery store. No matter what you do, it's not going to exist. You're going to have issues there. And then with all of that, you start to have subsets of issues. Senior hunger, for instance. Georgia has an aging population. So we have seniors who have very difficult issues from caregiving, but also as far as food is concerned. And that necessarily is not just an access problem, but just how to get food to them. Improving eating habits. There are various programs out there that actually try to improve eating habits that people have. They exist. Actually looking at how do we show persons how to improve their eating habits, whether we're talking about online platforms, direct education, things of that nature. Other subset of all this is child hunger. School nutrition plays a part in that, and that's why you'll see in this particular bill, the school superintendent will also be part of this. School nutrition plays a huge part of that. And we heard from many schools in rural areas that talked about some of the farm programs or farm-to-table programs that they are actually using. And then, of course, our farmers markets play an integral part of all this. So all of these are subsets of food insecurity, and they all present different issues that we kind of need to tackle with. And through all of this, we also have a goal of making sure that our Georgia farmers are part of this process. So that's the other key. And there actually are programs to make sure that happens. So whether we're talking about grocery stores, whether we're talking about the Dollar Generals and food banks filling in there, whether we're talking about all the subsets, one of our key goals should make sure that Georgia farmers are actively participating in all of those activities. And there are actually programs out there to make sure that that does happen. So what you find is, as one of the persons testified, is there's no coordination between what we have in Georgia. So there's these layered issues that exist, but there's no coordination. That's what we're trying to get to with this particular bill, is to bring all these different interests together and to make sure that they can work together to solve the issue of food insecurity, because that's different than necessarily food, just simply food access, even though they do intersect. But I do also want to talk about, it will be necessary, I believe, to look at how to bring grocery stores in. You see my example, if you look at the bill, there's only one out of the 13 areas that this Food Policy Council is going to look at, there's only one that deals with actually bringing in grocery stores. That's a whole nother conversation. This conversation is about food insecurity. There's only one out of the 13 prescriptions that we look at that talks about trying to bring in grocery stores. That's a different issue. And the issue becomes not only trying to bring in traditional grocery stores, because what you'll find as you research that particular space is not only bringing in traditional grocery stores, which requires one set of metrics, it's also talking about how to encourage co-op grocery stores, how to encourage community-owned grocery stores, how to actually figure out and navigate how you have actually where some states allow counties to actually own a grocery store. That's a different whole different conversation with a lot of different metrics that go into it. That's why in our bill, only one aspect talks about food deserts or bringing in grocery stores. And that was more traditional using tax credits. But there are so many other areas that you can tap into as far as bringing in grocery stores, because they're going to be different. They're not going to all be the same. And that's a totally different conversation, and it's a needed one. But they are separate, and you don't want to try to put them together, because what would then happen is they would get too commingled. And you'll say, well, we've done it. We've got our tax credit for grocery stores. The problem is solved. Or, well, we've done it. We know how to feed people. The problem is solved, but you don't know how to bring in grocery stores. So they're interrelated, but they're also very different. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I'll be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Senator. We do have one question here, Chairman Camp.
Thank you so much, Senator, for bringing this bill. I was reviewing it, and I know from my background working, and I was on a school board for a number of years. The WIC program is a federal program. You can make recommendations to the federal government, but that doesn't mean they're going to change their policy.
It's 75% federal and 25% state. And you can't quite quote me exactly what 25% is, but there are some levels that are actually state run, I guess, is for lack of a better word. We had the Department of Human Services come in and actually talk about that and the different challenges that they have. And of course they did say, well, a lot of this is federal, but there are some things that we kind of work with too. And that is where, to be honest, some grocery stores didn't even realize that was basically a lot federal, but there are certain things that the state can work with them on. And they were happy to do that, but they just never been, and that's why we have them together on this particular board or in this policy council to figure out where they can actually work from a state perspective, not just from a federal perspective.
With the 25%.
Right. The different areas that they can work together on.
All right. That's a state match, though, isn't it?
Correct. That's part of a state match, but it's also part of just some regulations. And that's what some of the grocery store owners were discussing and I think one of those key regulations was the sell dates, the buy-sell date. That was one. That was a conversation that continued to come up, that they thought the state could actually make more of an impact on, that date, that end date is not a spoliation date. And that what happens is WIC comes in and actually does basically they do an inventory of this, and it causes the grocery store to use manpower hours to take the merchandise off, but of course the merchandise is not sold. So, but that becomes one of the key questions is, where can those parties actually operate together? We know if it's federal, we have to deal with that. And we're not really saying we can make suggestions there. The question becomes whether there is any kind of state input, where can we make changes there?
All right, I have one more question if you'd allow, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead quickly.
Quickly. All right, so on lines, 85 and 92, is there any specific reason why a member of the Chamber of Commerce from a rural area was included in this? Considering that there are many areas of the state that do not have access to fresh foods or healthy foods or foods in general?
No, and in fact, there was no particular reason why they were not included. I think the main thing was just trying to keep the numbers at a certain level, but certainly that could be included. That's not.
Well, there are a litany of people included on this.
Yes.
2 pages almost, 1.5 pages. All right, thank you.
Chairman Perkle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sell by date. If you've ever been to a day-old bread store, I don't know what we have to do with the General Assembly in terms of legislation to inform consumers that this is best by this particular date, but it doesn't magically, like what's the Cinderella? What's the one that had lost the shoe at the midnight? Cinderella. That it doesn't automatically go bad. You go to day-old bread store. I don't understand why the LG gets 5 appointments to your board. The House, my speaker only gets 4, and lastly, the Food Depot. I mean, that's a good grocery store.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's like a regular grocery store. They feel a need in communities all over the state. Do a wonderful job in providing fresh food and supplies, grocery supplies, to our communities all over the state. I don't know if Ms. Cassava, I know you're a grocery store person. If she needs to talk, but
I'm
they
a
do a great
customer of
job.
Food Depot occasionally.
Yeah.
It's one
Great job.
just down the road from me.
Yeah.
Well, I hope my comments about Food Depot weren't taken negatively. What I was just saying was they themselves say that they purposely set themselves up as a smaller kind of organization. No, absolutely, and that they fit a need. And I was saying that the traditional kind of statements are, if you listen to persons, I don't want a Food Depot, I don't want a Dollar General, we want a Kroger or something of that nature. My point was, no, that's exactly what it's going to be, a Food Depot that's actually going to fill those needs. They're going to fill those needs. The question is how to assist them.
Thank you for clarifying that, because Food Depots, Piggly Wiggly's, man, they provide great service. IGAs, independent folks all over the state fill a lot of these needs. Thank you.
We got one other question, Representative Thomas.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Senator, for bringing this bill. I had the privilege of being at many of the hearings that your committee held this summer, and it was very insightful. We got a lot of information from a lot of entities in the food industry that participated in this study committee. I wish the study committee could have been joint, but it was just Senate. Question, and before I get to my question, there's a new entity in food insecurity called ACE on the case, and that's food access, food consumption, and food education. Your bill basically outlines everything that ACE is set up to be. When we get to the education part, your bill talked more about the policy and education. Was there any education towards the actual consumers or population from your bill?
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the things that's also in the bill. If you see, it talks about basically having a centralized location website to where persons can actually receive education on eating habits, receive education on actually not food access, but food education. There also is, through SNAP, there actually is an education program through that. What we're actually trying to do is figure out how to coordinate all of these different entities, quite frankly. That's one of the things we're trying to do. And of course, at the same time, create solutions also. But one of the key things is how to coordinate everything together too. The SNAP has an educational component. You have other areas that have educational components. For instance, you have hospitals, and that's why you'll see in here talks about hospitals actually being part of this. Whether it's Grady, also Emory, they have hospitals talking about food for medicine. They go out and actually educate persons as far as how food can be used for medicine. Grady was very instrumental in doing that. So the education is there on different levels, but as you see, it's bifurcated or it's fragmented, and that becomes the problem. How do we kind of bring all that together in a cohesive way for the citizens of the state?
Thank you, Senator. I got a couple other people who want to speak briefly, I think, on this bill, and we'll try to wrap it up here pretty shortly. Kathy Kadaza, if you could come, thank you for you. I know you represent our grocery group, and Podium Mike, thank you for being here.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you so much. I just wanted to clarify a few things in your questions. The Georgia Food Industry Association represents both the large stores from the Krogers, Walmarts, Publixes of the world to the local independents, the IGAs, the Piggly Wigglies, the Food Depots, and we provide a valuable service across the state, of course, providing groceries to your constituents. The pandemic has been tough for all of us. I know one of the things I'm most proud of is that we stayed open while so many businesses had to close. So we were constantly revamping what we were doing, and we were a very, very vital participant in making sure everybody got the food that they needed. A couple of things. I worked with Senator Jones on the task force, went all across the state and brought together a variety of people, and it was fascinating to watch how a lot of people do, as Senator Jones talked about, think that grocery stores are the the answer to every problem in the world. And because there was such a good understanding after we talked with the committee members and the people in the communities to understand that our profit margin is typically below 2%. On an average, it's about 1%. It's been higher right now, but it's less than a 2% business. So in the rural areas, it is more challenging because we are a penny business, so we have to have a lot of pennies, a lot of customers to come in. So a lot of times, one of the questions I get the most, Chairman Mathis is not here now, but one of the questions I get the most is, please bring a grocery store to my neighborhood. And I come in all the time talking to my grocers, trying to see whether there is an economic impact that they can be successful in an area. A lot of the tax incentives, things that people think that are the answer, a grocery store can be handed a store, but unless there's the people there, we can't make it work. We have to have a population of people, and not populations of people who shop where they work, but then go back home to a rural area and use a large grocery store as a convenience store. We're just not going to have enough pennies in there to operate a grocery store. So that's one thing. A couple of the things that Senator Jones talked about. What is frustrating when you do open a store, if you haven't had a store at all, if you do not have a SNAP license at all, when you operate a grocery store to apply for WIC, that's when you need to wait for 1 year. And that's WIC regulations, that you have to be a SNAP license, you have to have a SNAP license for at least a year, which really, if somebody's new in the business, is really a disincentive, because if you're going into an area that needs food access, you have to wait for a year. Another thing that we brought to the committee, and I'm thrilled that Senator Jones really took a good understanding about, is the Georgia WIC agency. And that's under the Department of Public Health. And yes, that is federal funds for the federal funds is the piece that actually pays for the groceries, but it is a state-federal partnership, and it's the state Department of Public Health that actually runs the Georgia WIC program. That is where we talk about a lot of, they have only certain times that people can, that retailers can apply to be a WIC retailer, and that when you go into an area that needs help, those customers are on WIC. That's your real benefit. That's a fantastic program. And that talks about real education on eating healthy. We need more people on WIC, and we need retailers to be able to service the customers more quickly and not have such a waiting game. Right now, you have to have, not only you have to have SNAP for a year, but even you take like a large Kroger, Publix, anybody, you can't get access to WIC quickly. So that's one of the things when we talked about in the committee, they really recognized a program that's so fantastic on giving good public health policies and even cooking, everything on eating healthy. That's just not easily accessible in the current state. I do want to talk about Food Depot. We talked about dollar stores serving a community. I wanted to make sure Food Depot is a standard grocery store. It's got the produce everybody wants. The grocery store is to have the large produce departments, meat departments, et cetera. So that's an independent retailer. They've got over 45 stores. So some people would consider that a chain store. They're not as large as a Kroger or Walmart, but they've got stores up to 45,000 square feet. So it's nothing like a dollar store. One final thing that I wanted to talk about, Commissioner Black, when he was Agriculture Commissioner, he did change some of the rules as far as if you have a box of Cheerios that is past Best Buy date for a week, we don't have to take that away. That now is Georgia law. The WIC agency, however, the potentially hazard food is, go back to the Department of Agriculture, the potentially hazard food, which has a temperature, anything that has got to be kept at a certain temperature, that does come under what we have to remove by sell date. The WIC agency, however, they come in, and even if there's something that is not potentially hazardous food, they'll say that they want that removed, and they'll write up a retailer for that. A handful of violations for retailers, then they get their WIC license taken away. So those are the kind of things that we worked with the committee. But I thank you for listening today. If you ever have any questions on grocery stores, on food safety, on anything, I'm here all the time, and I just appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. We have one other person signed up wanted to speak, Amy Schumer. Thank you.
Hey, y'all, I'll be quick. I'm Dr. Amy Sharma from Science for Georgia. I want to just offer my enthusiastic support for this bill. We've been doing a lot of research on food insecurity, and we've been working with Senator Jones on his committee. And I think that he hit all the highlights, right? The real reason for this bill is that there are a ton of agencies that are all, and organizations and nonprofits, and they are all trying to do the right thing, and they are all working tirelessly to make sure Georgians have food and healthy food in their bellies. But right now, due to lack of coordination, we are leaving a lot of money on the table. We have gaps in some places, and we have overreach in a lot of other places. And so how do we work together to get people supply, right? How do we make sure we're supporting our farmers and getting our Georgia grown food to people? How do we actually get the food in the stores? How do we give people the funds to buy the food? How do we educate people on what they want, right? If they see a vegetable they've never seen before, it might be delicious, but let's give them information on how to cook it and what to make happen, right? There's a lot of things all along this chain, and this bill does actually address all of those things all along the table. So I support this in order to make sure that we coordinate and maximize our resources across the state to feed people of Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you, and time's is pretty much run out. Thank y'all for your patience. Senator, you want to sum up?
I do want to just say one thing, Mr. Chair.
And then we'll,
on page
adjourn.
4, and it's my mistake. On page 4, line 85, it does have the lieutenant governor appointing someone for a Chamber of Commerce in an urban area. But then on line 92, that is a mistake. That should be the speaker appointing one from a rural area. That's why it also says urban. So the speaker would have been appointing someone from a Chamber of Commerce from a rural area. So that change can be easily made.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Senator, for this work. I know it's complicated. I know it's a lot of needs out there, and it's a big problem for a large segment of our population. And with that, got one announcement before we go. Commissioner Harper says that if you want a American hat, a cowboy hat, that they're in his office all day. I know taking orders and checking for size. So feel free to go over to the Department of Ag if you're interested in a hat. With that, I don't know when we'll schedule another meeting, but it will be soon. And thank you for your patience. I didn't realize we were going to get into so many different bills today, but a lot to digest. Thank you for your time. Meeting adjourned.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion we fill that with Dickey's ice cream. Yes, sir.